All right. Sorry, last week was not the best week for computers and my relationship with them. My computer died a couple hours before our meeting was supposed to start for class last week, and I spent 2.5 hours solid trying to figure out how to fix it with no luck. And Saturday, I had an appointment. I took it to Best Buy. They actually fixed it for me, or Friday, they actually fixed it for me, and I've just been able to get back online. So, which is really nice. So I can go back to grading and stuff like that. Because of that, there was no video for last week, and I thought I had told people, and evidently I had not. Um, what we're going to do for attendance for last week is I'm going to change that assignment. I'll put it up after we're done with tonight's meeting. And that assignment will be uh, list 5 things that surprised you about last week's module. And last week's module, let's see, I believe last week's module was where meaning goes to die. And it just essentially talking about uh, postmodernism. And so we're not going to do a video for that. And then this week we're going to talk about this module of contemporary art in the realm of street art. We're going to basically talk just about that. And before we go into that, what I wanted to do is go over some of the AI stuff that people have turned in and just look at that and assess what people have done. Then I will recap last week's thing for just a short while, and then we'll spend the rest of our time together going over this week's module. Again, I am sorry about the confusion and everything, but the computer got back online and nobody's going to have to watch anything last week. You are just going to write down. Now, I have told people several times they didn't get credit for attendance because they summarized the module instead of writing down 5 things that they learned from the video itself. And I hope that isn't confusing as you go back to just writing 5 things down that you learned during the module or that surprised you from the module. And each point has to be less than 20 words. We'll do that. And that's what you'll get attendance for. And I'm thinking that since we don't have class at all next week, what I may do is put up another attendance module where I just talk about what the projects that people have done and everything. And it'll be something that you're not required. But if you do decide to look at it, you'll get extra credit points for that. But if you decide not to do it, you aren't going to be held accountable and you aren't going to lose anything. And that's for next week. One of the reasons why I try to do that every year is because depending on your family or friend situation, I found myself in a couple different things where times where I just wanted to get away from everybody for a while. And if I was able to say, hey, I'm sorry, my teacher's kind of a jerk and I have to do this really quick, then that meant I could go and have that excuse to stay away from everybody for about an hour or so, get my head back together, and then I could go back into the fray. If you guys need it, it's there. If you don't need it, you're not going to lose any points for not doing it. All right, so that's that. Now, I want to let's see. I'm going to start by just sharing what the AI assignments that people have done, and I have this screen up that says the neon thing, but I'm going to share this tab instead. And the assignment is basically you need to supply for your submission. You've got to supply those 5 original images that you selected, and just go through the process and include exactly what I lay out. So this, I think, is a pretty good one because the person is using the 4 tools of artistic critique in it. However, I do not see the 5 original images and the original prompt, and maybe that's something that I'm just missing. Let me see. No, that wasn't included in the submission. So this person, in order to get full points, is going to need to come back and redo this so that it includes those 5 initial images that are required, as well as the first and second prompts. But what they've got, I think, works pretty well. And the reason why we need that is because we're specifically looking at, is this supposed to be Baroque or Renaissance? What are the samples that you selected? What does that demonstrate in your own ability to critique and quantify what you see in a medium or in a period or a movement? All those kinds of things. And then, how close you are to following the directions. So this person will need to go back and resubmit with those things included. And when I grade it, I will be very detailed about that. Now, this person, it looks like this person they're doing a romantic style painting, and they have selected 5 images that really express that kind of the foreboding aspect of realism. And then they created a prompt. This is looking like a really good expression so far. Now it's interesting because this is what they got back from that prompt where they showed all those dark images. And it's really great that they were able to go through a critique with that. So they changed the prompt to make it a little bit more dark and foreboding. And this feels like this is a little bit closer to that kind of thing. And this person pointed out that even though it's better, it still is not close to the same level of emotional power as well as other images. So I think this person did a really good job of putting this assignment together, which is essentially using AI to help you articulate what makes a movement, specific, and also using your capacity for critique to explain why AI works in this case as an image generator or not. And I think this person did a really good job doing that. So if you're one of the few who haven't done your AI project already, that was a good example, and I think that this is another good one. Remember, please, when you do turn it in, that you also need to turn in this assignment into the discussion area. If you've done your assignment and you haven't turned it in, 7 people have not turned in this assignment into the discussion area. So make sure that you do that as soon as you can, so you can get full points. So these are the images that they picked. And let's see what this is really interesting because it has a very similar feel to it. And then this also. So these are really interesting. And then I really appreciate what this person had to say about it. So again, this is a really good entry. So this is Impressionist. So they found 5 good paintings that are examples of that. And then they used Red Panda. Nice. This is really interesting. And I like that they talk specifically about some of the hallmarks that are identifiers for Impressionism. I think they did a really good job. So again, the imagery that you get from AI is secondary. It's the whole process of how you engage to both build those images and then evaluate them when they're done. That whole process is what we're looking at. Okay, this person, it looks like they did a really good job of understanding what's going on, but they did not include the images of the 5 paintings. However, I do remember what those paintings look like, so that was pretty good. I think this is really startling at how much it fits in that kind of genre. So I think they did a really good job on this one too. Okay, so this person did, I think, what, expressionism with the small dabs of color. So they used pointillist and then Van Gogh, kind of expressive stuff. But I do not see, let's see, I'm going to do some checking and see if there's another section that did not come through. No, that was the submission. So this person will need to, and I'll say exactly what they need. But we have the 5 initial things here, which is good, but we do not see the AI images. And what we'll need to do is, for the points on this assignment, the person will need to submit the remaining details of the assignment in order to get full points. And that includes the prompts that were used, the critiques of the images that the AI delivered, and that sort of thing. So these are the 5. It looks like they're doing Renaissance, Northern Renaissance, okay, with a little bit of Italian Renaissance in there. And then this is what they came up with, Renaissance painting. I thought that's really kind of interesting. And then they did a reflection as well with the critique model that we engage with in this class. This is really interesting. The kind, why AI would pick this, and I appreciate the fact that this person is writing about it and really engaging with that. Again, the most important thing is being able to articulate what's going on, as opposed to making a quote unquote good AI image. All right, excellent. Those are really interesting. Some very good examples with the AI assignment. Now, one of the things that we missed is we cut off. I just barely started talking about conceptualism, and if you remember, this is an excellent video to watch. I would go back. This is in the module 2 weeks ago. Watch these 2 videos about conceptualism. I think it really helps, and read those 2 articles. And conceptualism is when people are using their skills as an artist, specifically not to necessarily make something new, not to or paint or craft something new, but the intent of the conceptualist work is to help you think a new thought or think about something specific, not think what the artist wants you to think, but engage with thoughts that you wouldn't normally have if you hadn't encountered the artist's work. Like this Joseph Kossuth 1 and 3 chairs, where you have a photo of a chair, a real chair, or a physical chair, then a description of a chair. This is all engaging you in a conversation about Plato's allegory of the cave and the world of the real. So I think conceptual art does have its place, definitely. And performance art is just a type of conceptual art. So definitely watch these videos. If you don't watch all of them, the Marina Abramovich is going to be the best one. It is difficult sometimes, some of her stuff. And I really like Frances Alice. Faith Move Mountains. This is He's from Mexico. He is a conceptual artist. In Faith Move Mountains, he had over 300 volunteers work all day to shovel this. There was a small, long mountain, and he got all the documentation showing that he got permissions from everybody. But he got over 300 volunteers use shovels and volunteer labor to dig out one side of this long, small mountain and add that dirt to the other side. And in the hours that they worked on it, they were actually able to move it three feet. But it was enough that there was a note put on cartographic or map top. What are they? Topology maps that the mountain had moved, and it was all his conceptual work is all about individuals recognizing that they do have power to make changes in the real world. And I think beautiful work. Installation deals with this as well. Christo and Jean-Claude are some of my favorite installation artists. They wrap things in plastic or canvas. And when they do that, it draws attention to them because the first thing you do or want to do when you come across something that's wrapped is unwrap it and find out what's there. And Jean-Claude and Christo got a lot of flack from people saying, you're just covering stuff up with plastic. It's not real art. What the people that said that weren't aware is that Jean-Claude and Christo would be approached by people who lived in a community where their economy was dying sometimes. This happened in Florida. This happened in several other areas. And Christo and Jean-Claude would get grants, donations from people to come in and do something to specifically incite engagement with the object that they were covering. Doing this in the Florida Keys, they surrounded several Florida islands, small islands, with these plastic piers that floated on water. And it just looked like somebody highlighted around these islands. And several people critiqued them. There was even a lawsuit put against them on behalf of the people of those areas that the people in those areas quashed because they're the ones that worked for about 10 years to get Jean-Claude and Christo there. What was interesting as a result of that, the state police and park and rec police, and then also federal parks police were able to get enough attention drawn to them that they were able to police the waters there for the use of illegal trolling equipment that had been killing the manatees. And it also completely revitalized the economies of these communities where Jean-Claude and Christo did this. And it was because it brought people's attention to these islands. And it just really amazing stuff. So definitely, and Dohosa does a lot with memories and how important being human is. So I really like these. And feminist art is, again, dealing with building concepts inside people's minds, ask people to think about stuff. And I really like a lot of these people just because they make you think. I think Betty Saar is one of my favorite artists in the whole history of the world. I really like Barbara Kruger. And the Guerrilla Girls are able to articulate why these ideas are important that these conceptual artists worked with. So anyway, that's a quick recap of that from 2 weeks ago. And I wanted to just go over a little bit of what we were supposed to talk about last week when my computer died. The module for last week is basically talking about postmodernism and coming into the future, dealing with contemporary art. Modernism generally is considered to be about mid-19th century to about mid-20th century. So about 1840, 1850 to about 1950, post-World War II. Modernism, all the movements that take place in that modernism art period are movements where the artists involved were either demonstrating how the world looked to them as an individual. So they were no longer making trees that everybody could identify as a tree. They were making a tree that felt like the tree that they wanted or that they saw or they reacted to. That's one thing. Another is artists doing things to specifically engage the viewers to take a responsible role in looking at art. Helping, like talking about the cubist, depending on you as an intelligent viewer, to see something and to help them generate the meaning for the art. And still, up to about 1950, there is some sort of narrative presence, which means that there's a story behind the art. It means something in the minds of the people that made it. And whether or not it's they want to communicate that meaning to you, it's usually the artist, they will present what they make to engage you with the process of developing the meaning during this period, not necessarily trying to get you to understand what they're doing. That's not what they're doing. So there is a meaning there, and they want to work with you in developing that meaning for the most part. That's generally what's going on with modernism. Post-modernism, after 1950, there's all these new technological developments and materials and things where people start producing art in large part because they can, because it's interesting to them. It's not important anymore to have an engagement with meaning because the meaning revolves around the fact of the making. The evidence that the artist was involved and the evidence that you were involved in looking at it. That's where the importance of the art comes in. And that shift away from narrative story to just doing it because it's interesting or it's fascinating or it looks good or it looks cool or this is a new manufacturing process that people haven't seen outside of the underbelly of their car. Those kinds of questions are what drive the postmodernist artist. And I include this just a little bit, as part of the conversation about what the differences are. So definitely, I hope you watch this movie or this video. And this is a really good conversation about what is art. And talk about the forms. This readdresses those ideas in conceptualism that we talked about. And deconstruction is a fancy word where you're just looking at something and you're kind of pulling apart to kind of share with people the process of discovery. And Derrida proposed the idea of calling that deconstruction or deconstructionism because it sounds better than I pulled it apart to see how it worked. When I mentioned Wesley Snipes, Jean-Claude Van Damme, and Steven Seagal, these guys, starting in the 90s, where like digital media really started getting legs, and direct to DVD, direct to video, the production value was a lot higher than it had been during the 80s. And these three actors they started going to writers outside of Hollywood to get material, and they would use film crews in East Europe, Southeast Asia, places that were really off the Hollywood radar, because what they were all doing is exploring the idea of the action hero that really came to its own, in the early 80s. The first contemporary action hero, how we think of it today, is commonly thought to be Sylvester Stallone with his Rambo movie. And we can make arguments about that. I think it had its genesis a little bit earlier, but really that's what we think about. The kind of guy that has the hero that uses energy and violence to resolve issues with the bad guys. You have a morality play hidden in active entertainment. And what these three actors were doing, which I think is really interesting, is they each made a series of low-budget movies that some of Wesley Snipes, they were pretty well connected. Steven Seagal, not so much. And Jean-Claude Van Damme tried really hard to make sure that there wasn't a lot of connection between his. But they were exploring each of their movies. They were exploring a different aspect of how do you make an action hero? Does the guy have to be good? Does the guy have to be on the right side of the question? Does the guy have a crisis of conscience? What are these kinds of things that help an audience connect with a quote unquote action hero? So a very interesting body of work from them. And most people are not, they don't care. But I just think it's fascinating. But that is what artists were doing at about the same time. Visual artists, sculptural artists doing the same kind of thing in their own work, exploring what makes a sculpture, what defines a painting. Not making a painting necessarily, but making an object that asks those kinds of questions. So talk about modernism, postmodernism, that the difference is modernism generally deals with meaning, has a presence of meaning. Postmodernism, meaning is not that important. Generally, on average. So, watch as many of these as you find interesting. Definitely check out these ideas. And we talked a little bit about appropriation, where you adapt material from another realm of, I don't want to say existence necessarily, but another realm of living into your own space. You take it out of its original context. And we do this all the time. Cultural appropriation is something that we do as human beings. And what makes it bad is when a group that is in the ascendancy, they're the ones that have the assumed rights, for example. And a lot of this is just completely may very well be delusional, but it's when somebody like that finds something that's interesting, removes it from its original context, doesn't have any respect for its history, and uses it now because it's cool. About 6 years ago, I want to say, there was a high-end sunglasses campaign where somebody thought, oh, it would be really cool if we use some of these Balinese tattoos on the models. And they did that as a visually dynamic element in the marketing with no thought to where it came from. And that got a lot of backlash because there was absolutely no reason for them to do this other than it was cool and nobody'd seen it before. And then you also get a number of designers. There's there's a department store, higher end department store. It starts with the D. They sell a lot of really nice clothing, but they carry this Danish designer. And what she did was specifically work with indigenous Danes, people whose families go back centuries and centuries, and natural dyes, natural materials, and made a clothing line that she designed specifically as aesthetically functional. Or it was based on a functional aesthetic, and it's all sourced with the families that had these dye traditions in their families for generations. It's sourced from farmers who have been growing these materials for the fabrics for generations, and it has really powerful history. But it's dynamic enough that one of her outfits will sell for a couple $1,000s, and that money, she's not. That money goes to all the people that she has connected with to help keep their traditions alive. Another good one is specialty leather fabrics, leatherware, where the really weird stuff. The Aga Khan Foundation worked with a small town in Egypt that is, for the country of Egypt, historically the leather goods place to get all the highest end stuff. In the last 50 years, it really went downhill. The Aga Khan Foundation went in about 20 years ago. They worked with designers in the US, Japan, and Europe, as well as Central and Western Africa, to get these leather goods, to provide a market for them. And there's leather that was developed in Morocco and stuff like that people are using with the context and awareness of its history. And that's an example of good cultural appropriation, for example. Stuff like that I think is really interesting. And a lot of these are movements and things like that talk about. But that's basically what I was supposed to share with you last week. And this conversation about Kandinsky's idea in concerning the spiritual and art of the prophet of the future. He describes the artist as prophet in two different ways. One is a person who is self-reflective and critiquing the culture within which they live. And then the artist is also somebody who either warns or extols the virtues of a future being developed from what is going on now. So it is an extension and extrapolation of that cultural self-awareness that is the first aspect of the artist as prophet. So these are some questions they have, and there are some really interesting questions in here, but I don't really expect you to go through everything. I expect you to be aware of the general gestalt of those kinds of questions. And then this week, we are talking specifically, so that was 2 weeks ago, last week, and then this week we are talking specifically about street art. And this is where we're going from postmodernism, about 1950. These discussions deal with 1950 to closer to today. And then here we're talking about contemporary work. Now, these three words or phrases, where we got modernism, postmodernism, and contemporary, there is a video in here. There's a couple times I share it where I talk about those three different things. I think right here, if you go to postmodernism under children, you scroll down here, there is this video right here talks about pre-modern, modern, and postmodern, what the change is. This talks about the change from modernism to postmodernism. And then there is and talk about appropriation, but I believe I have a video here too, which talks about what is contemporary art. The Smart Talk talks about that. And then this guy talks specifically about what is the difference between modernism, postmodernism, and contemporary art. This is the thing that I find rather frustrating. Going into art history, it seems like people coming up with these terms don't really think it through and just are not engaged creatively in coming up with these different terms. And that kind of bothers me a little bit, because these terms are very different things. But there is a lot of overlap, and these things are not, there aren't hard and fast rules to put things in. As an example, I think Bauhaus and Russian constructivism or Soviet constructivism both took place at, their contemporaries in Europe and other places of Europe were dealing with things like Cubism, for example. And what the Bauhaus and Soviet constructivists were working with was ideas of designing around the structural promises of different industrial materials. And so it was an aspect where they weren't really interested in the story behind the stuff. They were interested in the materials itself, which kind of puts it into postmodernism. But because they did their stuff before 1950, they're considered modern. So there is some overlap. What we're going to be talking about today is contemporary, and the difference between or among modernism, postmodernism, contemporary. Modernism is the artists are doing things to show how they view the world. There is a little bit of a meaning behind it. There's a story. Postmodernism, the artists are working with materials that are fun to work with, and they don't have an awful lot of that kind of story behind the material. What separates contemporary art out is artists are still working with all those ideas. They're bringing it up into the future to make the visual language more appropriate, more responsive to what people's experience is today. The reason why they're called contemporary, we lump them into the contemporary field, is it's basically art that is produced by people or who create a work within the memory of the people viewing them at present. That's what contemporary art is basically. So there's not specific styles or anything like that. It's just art that has been done essentially since about 1980. And I imagine that that view will probably change. In 15, 20 years, there'll be art made since 2000. But maybe at that time, they'll have a completely different word for it. So contemporary art is essentially stuff that really couldn't have been done before about 1980, either because worldviews just didn't allow for it, or technology just wasn't there, or just because those ideas were completely uninteresting. And examples of this is nobody knew about email before about 30 years ago. So if there's any art that deals with concepts that we think about when we think about the email process, it is most definitely contemporary. Things that reference, for example, Rambo and Rocky, art that references those, even if they're done in a different style, art is still going to be contemporary art because that's art that couldn't exist before those movies were made, about 1980 or so. I hope that kind of makes sense. And if it feels it's still ambiguous, that's totally fine. That's the way it is, because there is this element of ambiguity and wishy-washiness in art history when we talk about this stuff, because the moment anybody comes up with a hard and fast rule or a hard and fast definition, seconds later somebody publishes a paper that contradicts it or shows that doesn't apply to every case, just because people are constantly adjusting what they think. And as our technologies to document stuff expand exponentially, and as our access to that documentation is expanding exponentially, we're going to constantly surprise ourselves with the new things that we learn and the new associations we can make between art objects or among art objects. I'm just thinking about when my father was still alive, about 1980 or so. I remember him talking about, I'm really excited for you boys because you're going to live long enough that you're going to have a computer that you can keep in your pocket that will be able to access every book on the planet, every library. And we all grew up. My dad was in the computer industry. He was on the forefront of things like robotics research and what became AI, bottom-up programming, reactive programming, different things like that. And so we grew up with science fiction, and we loved things like Star Trek and stuff, and Doctor Who. And so when he said that, there was a part of us that was really hoping that he was right. And then, of course, 40 years later, almost any kid in the mall with a pocket big enough is going to have, an iPhone, which you get on the internet and you can access the majority of published books on the planet. I just think that that's astounding. Anyway, so art that deals with that kind of connectivity is very contemporary. But what that also represents is we live in an unprecedented time where we can access all this documentation, photos and things like that are really high quality photos, where we can study in the safety of our living room or at the park stuff that happened in Rome 600 years ago and get a really good understanding of that because of how connected our society is today. And so art, I think, because of that, as a result or a reflection of it, has to fundamentally change. And I think we see that in the contemporary art space. And I think a really good aspect of contemporary art is graffiti. Graffiti is art that is done in public space, and it is typically vandalism. And I've spoken with a number of graffiti artists who say that graffiti has to be vandalism. And when people get permission to do it, it's not true graffiti. That's why I include the term street art, because street art is what legal graffiti is, essentially, or legalized graffiti. So when somebody commissions a person to spray paint on the side of the building, it's no longer going to be graffiti. They have the permission. then it becomes street art. It's a subtle distinction, but I remember being in a meeting when I was faculty at BYU where they wanted to invite graffiti artists to come and give a demonstration on campus. The guy didn't want to because he said if he did it with permission, it wasn't graffiti anymore. And they couldn't understand what he was talking about. But this is an example of the oldest extant graffiti as we understand it today. Two little girls, Petronia and Julia, who were best friends. And when they were kids, they scratched this on the side of a building in Austria that was an outcropping of the Roman Empire. So this is about 2,000 years old. And I think it's really a sweet little drawing because the two little girls were friends and they drew themselves how they saw themselves. But I just think that's sweet. If you saw this today on the edge outside of a courthouse or something like that, it would fit right in to our understanding today of what street art and graffiti is. I think that that's fascinating. So here's a number of links that I want you to examine and look at. We're going to look at at a number of the articles, and but not the videos. I'm sorry about that. That was a video, and I wasn't aware that the sound was on. So I'm pulling up a couple of these links right now so we can just look at them really quick. Okay, and I just found one of the broken links. If you guys are able, if you guys come across some of these links that are broken, please let me know as soon as you can so that I can fix them or find an alternative. And I'm finding that sometimes it's just as simple as, the reason behind it is that the company has died and no longer have a web presence. And sometimes it's as simple as they just changed their link tree within their website. So I want to look at a couple of these articles really quick. So this one deals with the history of graffiti. And I showed you the oldest graffiti. And there are examples. This person makes the argument that cave art was graffiti. And it's not. I really don't believe it is. A lot of petroglyphs are not, or petrographs aren't going to be graffiti either. And the reason is that graffiti, to be graffiti, needs to be public access in the public space. These caves, when we look at this cave art, these were not easy to get to. The caves that people did their art in were not easy to get to. There's a woman, Dr. Van Pensinger, who documents a lot of European cave art. And these spaces, she will have to get on her back in some places and crawl through a space for 100 feet that is only about 18 inches high. Or you go through an area where half of the cavern is submerged in water and you get all damp and wet going through. These spaces where these are drawn in, it feels more like you have to struggle to get to it. It almost seems like it's a process in the spiritual space that is designed to make you reflect on the struggles of life, perhaps, or the struggles of existence, or how grateful you are that you're alive. These are spaces that are not easy to get to for these. If we look at rock art here in Utah, much of the stuff that is really beautiful, I would say that newspaper rock has a greater chance of being appropriate to address it in ideas of graffiti than a lot of the other stuff. And I'm talking specifically about the layers on newspaper rock from about 1840 onwards. Because a lot of the rock art that we see in Utah and the Southwest and other places in the world even, once we get a picture of it and get it online, yeah, we can easily access it. but a lot of this stuff is going to be very difficult to get to. You get to go to Parowan Gap. Most of that you have to climb up, and you have to have rope. If you're the artist, you probably had a friend that was holding on to the end of the rope to keep you in the place you were. So it's not simple, easy access. It's not a public space. It's out in the middle of nowhere. It is on a route that people would travel to go from one space to another, but it makes me think of more these of something like a monument that was designed to remind people of something special, as opposed to I'm doing this because I'm walking by and I want to mark my territory. So I don't think that is appropriate to refer to these as graffiti. Now, something like this was in Pompeii, and this may have been an advertising for the tavern, but there are examples throughout the Roman world where little kids would. It looks like it's done with little kids because it's about 18 inches off the floor, and it's done rather simply. There are other ones that are higher up, but they would do drawings with the names of their favorite gladiators and talk about how awesome they were, and just it reminds me of when Banksy does portraits of people in his artwork. And then tags. This started. This began in the 30s. The idea of tagging. There was a large transient community of hobos, which were and a real hobo was somebody that still tried to retain their humanity, even though they did not have a home or a family to keep with them. And they would travel the rail lines generally, looking for odd jobs, but enjoying that kind of a freedom. As well, I don't know if enjoy is exactly the right word, but embracing the lifestyle of that kind of travel freedom at the expense of regular meals, cleanliness, and regular work. And hobos would, because a lot of the people that came into the hobo lifestyle came into it because they lost everything during the Depression. A lot of the times they would carve things to let people know that the farmer down here always has work for people. This family you need to stay away from because they have a rifle, and they didn't write that out. A lot of the times they would have rebus or little drawings to communicate that. And I think that is, we could say that is the birth of tagging. But this grew very quickly where people would identify their social group in something parallel to what we would describe as a gang. Tags were used to identify individuals, and they would gain clout or lose clout, depending on how daring it was to mark stuff. And this is something that if you go to gang territories that were actually governed by threats of potential violence and things, who protected the people in this community and stuff. Tags were used to mark those territories, but also for individual members to gain clout. And I learned all this from a friend of mine who is a member of a gang, and I had a series of interviews with him, just specifically talking about tagging culture, graffiti culture, and they're very interesting. But this is the kind of stuff that you see on train yards with train cars and things like that, and there are sometimes symbols where the person implies that they were traveling when they were doing this, which gives you a lot of clout. The more difficult it is to get to spaces, the more clout you have as a tagger. And if you're identified by the larger community as a member of a specific gang, family, or social structure, then that gang gains clout as well. Respect, essentially. So these are more examples of that. And then in the 70s, this is when, and what we're talking primarily about is the U.S., larger cities in the U.S. specifically, but then this also it shows up in Europe, all throughout Europe and the U.K. It wasn't until later that this starts showing up in other places with parallel to this specifically, And I'm thinking about the more artistic stuff starts showing up in Japan, Western Africa, South Africa, things like that. Um, Specifically in South Africa, a lot of this kind of stuff that was going on in New York for tagging and things like that. Yeah, some of the harshest gangs in the world were in are in Johannesburg, so a lot of that stuff showed up. But you can see it starts changing from these simple hobo sign style notes to stuff that is a lot more involved. And you start seeing this right now in Nigeria. There are taggers that are hired by communities to do this kind of thing, to brighten up their communities, because the communities that just look gray and drab because of protective walls. They want somebody to brighten up the walls, and they'll hire graffiti artists, so it becomes street art, to beautify their community with this kind of stuff, which I think is really amazing. And you start seeing these kind of characters showing up as well. And then it starts developing into its own art style throughout the 80s. And there's some really amazing stuff. And this relates directly to Banksy, for example. Then we get modern graffiti. One of my friends is a guy named El Cid who does calligraphy. And he was one of the first developers of the calligraphy movement, where he does, this is based on English calligraphy. He uses particularly Arabic and Persian calligraphy in his stuff. And he says it's calligraphy. It's not true graffiti because he always gives permission in the areas that he goes into, but he'll write beautiful, beautiful work on areas that are just the heart of nowhere, just really depressed areas. But people respond to the beauty of what he does, where gangs in the area won't mess with this stuff. They won't paint over it. They'll leave it. And just the presence of this beautiful calligraphy starts changing the atmosphere of the area. And he has gone around and done the outside of mosques in several places around the world. One of my favorites is in Tunisia, where he decorated the outside of the mosque with his calligraphy. Very, very beautiful stuff. And then today, this is where we get Banksy and stuff like that. So that's a really worthwhile article going through. Definitely watch those videos as well. And then this article, there's a lot of question and answer stuff. So this is definitely very worth looking through. And we can see this is an example of where street art meets graffiti. So some of these spaces are going to be very irritating and destructive to the property and property owners, and others are going to be something that it could be argued is desperately needed. Like right here, the bright colors, they're not in the original buildings, is a lot more, makes it a little bit more palatable to live there. And there are some areas right now where communities are paying street artists to come and do artwork, make murals, do things in their space to kind of reflect a desire for hope in the community. I think there's some really interesting stuff that we can see. But this video, we're not going to watch the video again. I'm going to show just portions of it. But these are activists in DC. This is 4 years ago that it was done. And these people this is by matter of fact, as the community that does this, but these folks respond, they do not like the idea of riots and things like that. So they responded to issues that they felt that were emotionally overwhelming by commissioning and creating graffiti style street art in specific places, specific communities, to just help people, to help revitalize the hope that people should feel in the place that they live. And these are some of the artists that are involved, some of the designers that are involved, And then it also goes through and shows people were painting over the destructive vandalism stuff that was put up before, the straight up illegal graffiti, and creating things that look like spaces of art, essentially. Where difference was they were intentionally made not to shock people or get clout, but to help people to think. And I really like that kind of approach to street art. And these people all made sure that they had the documentation to show that they had permission to do this. So technically, it was not vandalism. When we see stuff like this, I think it's really fantastic because it shows people using material that is consistent with a contemporary urban landscape and creating something using that landscape as part of the medium. And I'm sorry, I talked about this, but I was looking at all this and I forgot that I wasn't sharing the screen with you. I want you to see some of this work. And these are some of the artists that worked on it. So some really interesting styles of street art. There's another one of the artists that does stuff. And they were working specifically to avoid the destruction of riots. And some of them were things that very specifically targeted different ideas, but none of it was vandalism or graffiti because they got permission to do this. So it's all street art. Slogans to make people think about stuff, just showing the different kinds of things that people did. And I love this kind of work where people are engaging with individuals within the community to design and build stuff using the materials and effects of the contemporary urban landscape, but doing something purposeful. And some of this stuff you can only see when you're flying overhead, but I think it's fascinating to see people engaging with this and then the direct impact it has on these communities, which, to be completely honest, often are in areas that they just don't feel like there's a lot of hope. And you see this instead of the rusted side of a building, and it completely changes the dynamic of the community. Right. I really like that. Now, this video is, I want to share this video with you really quick. We're not going to watch it. But this is part of a larger documentary about a train tunnel and an artist who went into this train tunnel, abandoned train tunnel that a lot of homeless people were living in, finding shelter in, and he completely transformed it. He had an art degree, he was working on an art degree, and he became a graffiti artist. It's this guy right here. I can't remember his name. Oh, it was Chris Pape. And he is a renowned graffiti artist, and he will talk to guys that you think just barely got out of prison, and as well as your European hoity-toity artists, and fits right in because he draws from both extremes of this tradition. So he is a renowned illegal artist. He did do graffiti because the site that he went to, the underground train station, the abandoned train station, it was illegal for people to be there, and this is why it was a homeless refuge. And he said he walked in there, and there was a lot of this kind of tagging stuff. And what he started doing is doing stuff specifically to make a better environment for the people that live there and for the communities that went through there. And so definitely watch this video. It shows where this street tunnel was, and there's a lot of interviews with him. So he goes in and sees this kind of thing, and he did lots of interviews with homeless people, became friends with a lot of people in this community, and started asking them what they would want to see. And so he started doing things like this, where abandoned train car, instead of just tags, he covered up the tags with spray paint and make it interesting, make it look. He would treat it like it was his canvas. You know, you'd see this, people would just spray paint the sides of cars and stuff because they're tagging to get clout. And he started painting actual images. And he even shows some of the images that he painted, things to make people think. This is from the inside of the train station. He did, with spray paint, he did a copy of the Mona Lisa in there, as well as other Baroque and Renaissance images. He did a lot of calligraphy, but then he also did political portraits, political commentary. But so this is one of his things where he went, he did Francisco Goya's painting and using spray paint, and he did a lot of that kind of stuff, as well as stuff that was quite a bit more contemporary and consistent with the environment that he was in. So really fascinating stuff. And some of them would be direct political commentary. Some of it, and what he was responsible for is inspiring other artists that started dealing with this kind of thing too. Now this shows he came back after finishing one of these paintings, and just a small group of homeless started living around it, and that they made that their living room wall because they loved it. They thought it was great. But I think stuff like this, and then he was even able to interview a couple of the homeless folks as well, and they let themselves be on camera. But what's fascinating to me is that here's an art student that went into an abandoned property. It was illegal for him to be there, made friends with the gangs in the area and the homeless communities in the area who supported him in his efforts to make it beautiful by initially putting rebuilding some of these incredibly valuable Renaissance and historic imageries with spray paint. And he inspired a whole group of artists. He did this about 30, 40 years ago. And now, even people that are working to get clout and tag things, they can only really get clout if it's beautiful, if it looks nice. If it's more than just black marks. It has to show depth. It has to show ability, which I think is fascinating. But so he would do these kind of portraits, but then restructuring, reimagining, like everything from Andy Warhol to Rembrandt in this stuff. So I just think it's really fascinating. And he does do a lot of his stuff. He photographs and then shares the photographs with people. Now, when we look at this style of art, I mentioned that what makes graffiti different than street art is graffiti has to be illegal. What kind of questions are there about, in contemporary art? These kinds of questions I think are really important to talk about this, but they also deal with everything else of contemporary art. What media do artists work with today that they never worked with before? I think there's special effects in film, digital media, NFTs, all this kind of stuff didn't even exist 10, 15, 30 years ago. And these questions I kind of tilted specifically towards these conversations about graffiti and street art. But I think that they are, with a little bit of tweaking, are appropriate to adapt for any of the other kind of contemporary things. And again, contemporary is basically stuff after 1980 or within the living memory of the observer. So for a lot of us, it's going to be the last 20 years. But specifically, contemporary art is art that could not exist before 1980. So is the artist working with physical materials that were only invented recently, or physical or concepts that were only thought of recently, or concerns that were only thought of recently? Like one of my favorite contemporary artists right now is a Japanese artist that does motion control work where they'll have projections of moving images on a wall that will change as people viewing it move their bodies. As they point at it, as they make shapes, the images on the wall will transform, comparing in direct relationship to what the audience does. And this part of the module, I just take you through an exercise where we address the question, and then I show you an artist that deals with both sides. What are the legal things? Or I show you two artists that deal with both sides of this. Banksy does things that are both illegal and dramatically, what's it called, responsive to the contemporary world. And I also talk a little bit about regional work that I think is really interesting. Oh, I'm sorry, this is where I talk about graffiti in Nigeria. And these are the videos. Again, we're not going to watch the videos. I'm just going to show snippets from the videos. And this artist is pretty amazing. His name is Osa7. And what's amazing about him is that he does things specifically to beautify. In Nigeria, there's a lot of communities that are walled communities that are designed to keep the residents inside safe. And the walls themselves, since the residents inside rarely see them for a long time, were just let go to seed. And so people would tag them or spit on them or urinate on them or throw gum at them. And this artist, Osa7, is specifically tasked with going by the communities that live behind these walls to create beautiful space. And the reason why this person is important is that he was the first one to really embrace this idea and make it very contemporary. So his work is astounding because it's all bright. And he's, I think it's Logbo is the language that he's painting in, but he's also responsible for revitalizing people's interest in the historical Nigerian written language that people have forgotten about because they all write using Latinized words. He'll do very contemporary faces. He'll do contemporary things that are concerning contemporary. So the models that he uses a lot of the times are the people that live in these communities if they want. And he'll do stuff where people enjoy engaging with the artwork and it just makes it fun. So yeah, it's very much part of the urban and contemporary landscape, but it's enlivens the area. And again, it's not graffiti because he has permission. It's remains street art. Faith 47 is another one of an artist that I really, really appreciate. So this talks about community, and there is one other person. Vasco is a person that did a lot of stuff in the 70s and 80s, but I think addressed these ideas before anybody even thought about them. So definitely check that one out. But I think, Blue is somebody that is really amazing. And I think you'll see why. Again, we're not going to watch the video. We're just going to watch examples from it. But Blue considers themselves to be a animator, a street artist who is an animator, because they will do stop motion. They'll do stop motion films where Blue has worked with the community. Specifically, they work together to design a project, and then Blue starts filming it. And what this person does, it's all animated by the progression of the street art. Oh, let's see right there. So sometimes they'll use chalk or spray paint that they paint over, but each frame is an expansion of the street art piece and an erasure of something else. And so this individual can get stuff to seem like it's walking along or moving through the landscape because they'll paint something right here and paint something right here and paint something right here. And in the film, they use stop motion to make the paint look like it's transferring from one site to another. So I hope you can kind of see how the potential behind that, but definitely watch this video where you can see that things are moving through it, and it's all stop motion animation, and it's all stuff that's done specifically under the permission and direction of the community that he works in. And sometimes he'll engage, Blue will engage physical objects. Sometimes the narratives make sense. Sometimes they're just fun things, but it's all kind of written and designed in collaboration with the community itself. So this little sequence is a large fish chasing a small fish, and then the small fish gets a bunch of friends, and their school makes a big fish, and they start chasing the bully fish. And this sequence is some of the garbage that people found in the river coming out, excuse me, coming out on land. And there's a little story behind it. And then there's a sequence where an image moves, this lizard creature moves across and in front of the van and behind it, around on the building. I don't definitely take the time to watch this because the whole animation is just kind of fun. It's not designed to tell a story with a specific narrative or message. It was designed specifically to engage the whole community in building something that the whole world could see and helping everybody kind of feel like they were part of something that was creative instead of just people illegally tagging and vandalizing stuff. So definitely check it all out, that video. But the reason why I'm one of the reasons why I'm showing you this street art as contemporary art is we talked about performance art, conceptualism and all this kind of stuff. And what is exciting to me about all these kinds of street art is because people don't have to be engaged on the internet. They don't have to be um, having access to the latest tools. These are people using industrial material, oftentimes found in the neighborhoods that they're working in, working with the community to design something that everybody feels like they have a hand in, and it changes the atmosphere of the entire community because everybody is engaged with it. They're using components of many of the art periods and movements that we've looked at. You saw the one guy working the train tunnel drew from Renaissance, Baroque, and realism imagery. Some of the other artists, were using traditional Carolingian calligraphy to navigate the world of graffiti tagging and then transforming that into street art. Other artists were engaging 19th century marketing art to use that in their street art around Washington, D.C. protests several years ago, because they did not want to be involved in destroying businesses or anything like that. They got permission, so it wasn't vandalism, it wasn't illegal, but they were purposely beautifying and restructuring the aesthetic environment of their community. Like we saw images of the children on huge, larger than life on the side of these industrial buildings, where just a couple months before that was all covered with rust and was falling apart. And that kind of engagement, I think, is really fascinating to me because it's people using contemporary materials, stuff that they are very personally aware of. So they're from their own world experience and worldview. But when they are creating something that specifically has the power to transform the community and the people in the community for the better. And I think it's just absolutely amazing. So definitely go through, watch as much of this as you can. Now, next week, we're off for Thanksgiving. We are not going to have a class. I will have an attendance thing that is optional, where I'm going to probably walk you through more of those AI assignments, where I'm just going to share with you and talk about what each of them. If you watch it and you respond to it like we do typical attendance, then you'll get the attendance points. If you don't, you're not going to lose anything. You're just not going to be graded on it. So it'll be extra credit. And for last week, since my computer had absolutely died and I wasn't able to do anything, what we're going to do for last week is I'm going to change the description in the attendance. And what you're going to do is write down 5 things that surprised you from last week's module. So, and that's it. Other than that, I hope you guys have an absolutely wonderful and amazing Thanksgiving. This is the most popular holiday, the most celebrated holiday in the United States that does not have a basis in a specific religious tradition. During the Civil War, Abraham Lincoln received a letter from a woman who had been a champion of women's rights and an abolitionist for years. And in her letter to Abraham Lincoln, she said, during this time of this devastating war, I think it would be a wonderful idea to have a holiday where we specifically engage in gratitude. Whether or not somebody believes in a supreme being or any particular religion, that doesn't matter. I would propose that we have a holiday that's specifically designed to engage people in the idea of gratitude. And Abraham Lincoln thought it was a great idea. So in the middle of some of the darkest moments of the Civil War, he proposed that to Congress, and it passed this law. And I think that this is one of my favorite holidays. I think the best holiday of the whole year, of course, for me is Halloween, because why not? But where the whole element of the celebration is getting candy. I think that's great. But Thanksgiving, I think, is an absolutely wonderful holiday. And I hope you guys all are able to find things to be grateful for and reconnect with the people that you really care about and reconnect with the elements of your life that help give meaning. So stay safe, stay well, and catch up on what you can. But thank you very much for joining me today. And I will look forward to seeing you guys after Thanksgiving. I think we have one more class that we get together, and then we have finals week. And next, I will talk about what we're doing for the final next time we get together as well. The final is essentially going to be you writing or you responding to 4 different questions. It's not a comprehensive thing where you have to memorize all the facts and stuff that we covered in the class. So hopefully that helps people. And I will open that up and publish it the first moment the finals opens, and you'll have the entire several days of finals to go through and answer those questions. So, and we'll talk about that more next time we meet. In the meantime, be safe, stay healthy, and don't do anything that will land you in jail. We'll see you guys.